They called him Legrand, though no one ever knew if that was his real name. He was the court jester for royalty across Europe, appearing first in France in the late 1300s. Over the next several centuries, he served kings, queens, dukes, and emperors from England to Hungary, his eerie presence lingering like a curse across generations of monarchs. His role was always the same: to entertain, to mock, to amuse. But those who encountered him whispered that he was far more than a fool in motley. Legrand never showed his face. He was always seen wearing grotesque masks, crude and unsettling, as if fashioned from the faces of animals. Some said they were made of pigskin, stretched and dried, but when viewed closely, the texture was wrong. Too smooth, too human. The masks had features that were deformed: a twisted mouth, a crooked nose, hollow eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Each mask was worse than the last, and many wondered why he chose to hide his face beneath such horrors. But those who asked too many questions about the jester didn't ask for long. Servants who gossiped about him would disappear, and nobles who mocked him often met untimely deaths. Legrand, however, would remain unfazed and unchanged. He spoke with shifting accents, sometimes English, sometimes French, sometimes in tongues that no one recognized, as if he was collecting languages like a magpie hoarding trinkets. His voice could be light and airy, or deep and guttural. No one knew where he came from, only that he arrived one day and never left. The most unsettling thing about Legrand, though, was the paintings. Across the centuries, from court to court, he appeared in countless portraits, standing just behind the royals he served. Sometimes he was barely noticeable, a shadow at the edge of the canvas, his mask partially obscured. Other times he was painted in sharp detail, his misshapen face glaring out from behind the rulers he entertained. It became clear, as the centuries passed, that the man behind the mask was ageless. In a painting from 1432, Legrand stood behind Charles VII of France, mask in place, his bony fingers resting on a lute. In another painting from 1671, he could be seen in the court of Louis XIV, unchanged, his mask more grotesque than ever, its eyes bulging and teeth jagged. At first, the resemblance was brushed off as coincidence, but as more paintings were unearthed, all with the same figure, the realization began to sink in. Legrand had been there for hundreds of years, serving different rulers, but always the same. He was impossibly old, yet he showed no signs of aging. The royals he served grew old and died, yet he remained, eternally youthful beneath his horrific masks. No one knew the truth about Legrand, but rumors spread of dark magic, pacts with demons, and worse. A manuscript from the early 1500s, written by a court historian who mysteriously vanished, claimed to have uncovered the jester's true identity. According to the manuscript, Legrand was once a man named Guillaume, a peasant boy born in a remote village in Brittany in the late 1200s. He was hideously deformed from birth, his face twisted beyond recognition. The village feared him, believing he was cursed, and when he was a child, his own mother tried to drown him in the river. But Guillaume didn't die. Instead, he was saved, or so the legend went, by something ancient that lived deep in the forest. The creature, neither man nor beast, took pity on him and offered him a deal. It would grant him beauty, the ability to charm and delight, but the price would be his soul. Guillaume accepted without hesitation, desperate to be loved. The creature then took his face, peeling it from his skull, leaving only bone beneath, and replaced it with a mask of its own creation, a mask that allowed him to change his appearance at will. But the creature had tricked him. Each mask Guillaume wore would grow more grotesque over time, reflecting the darkness inside him. And so Guillaume became Legrand, the eternal jester. With his new power, he wormed his way into the courts of kings and queens, performing for them, delighting them with his wit and charm. But as the centuries passed, the masks became harder to control. He could no longer hide behind the illusion of beauty, and the masks he created began to resemble what he had truly become, a monster. Worse still, He had found that the masks required more than just craftsmanship. To retain his immortality, to keep his hideous secret hidden, he needed fresh material. The masks were no longer made of pigskin. They were made from human faces. Legrand had learned to harvest the faces of the children he sacrificed in secret, using their skin to craft his ever-changing disguises. The children, often taken from the villages surrounding the royal courts, were never seen again. Some said their souls were trapped in the masks, that the faint sounds of their cries could be heard if you stood close enough to the Jester. Legrand's immortality came with a price he couldn't escape. The creature in the forest had marked him, and as the centuries rolled on, he became less human with each passing year. Though he served royal after royal, entertaining the courts with his bizarre humor and twisted jokes, the nobles always sensed something wrong, something dark lurking beneath the mask. They laughed, but it was always a nervous laughter, tinged with fear. And then, as suddenly as he would appear, Legrand would vanish. No one knew where he went between reigns, but he always returned, unchanged, to serve the next generation of rulers. In 1745, he appeared for the last time in a painting, standing behind Frederick the Great. His mask in that portrait was worse than ever, stretched tight over a gaunt face, the eyes lifeless and cold. After that, he disappeared from history, his name and image fading into legend. But the paintings remain, scattered across Europe, each one more disturbing than the last. Legrand's tale has been lost to time, but the few who know of him still speak of the Jester who never aged, the man who wore human faces, and the dark deal that granted him eternal life. Some say he still walks among us, hidden behind a new mask, waiting for the day he can return to the courts of kings. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint laughter of a fool echoing through the ages, a laughter that chills the blood and whispers of forgotten horrors.